The Bible states that Adam and most of his immediate descendants lived to over 900 years old. By today's standards, that is a dramatic lifetime. The average today is around 70 years old, and most people don't make it above 100. That's considered quite old. So, how is this even possible? Is this literal historical information here telling us how long people lived, or is it not? That's one of the questions we're going to be answering today as we tackle Genesis chapter 5. But if you're new here, welcome to the Genealogy channel. What I try to do is bridge the gap between you and your Bible by answering questions about theology and science, apologetics, so that you have a better grasp of God's Word and how to apply it to your life. So jumping straight into chapter 5, I know we took a break last time when we talked about the Mount Ebal curse tablet. Very cool find. If you missed that video, go back and check it out. But today we are moving forward in our Genesis study. And remember, if you've liked these videos, if you like this one, make sure you hit the like button at the bottom and you subscribe so you can get more of this study and more and more different videos I'll be making as we go. But we're going to jump straight into this. So I'm not going to read the entire chapter to you like we normally would do, because it's a long genealogy and it's repetitive. So I think you guys can read that on your own, but I do want to read the first section and then point out a few things to you. So starting with verse 1 of chapter 5, and I'm still in the ESV like we've been doing through this study. This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female he created them, and he blessed them, and he named them man when they were created. When Adam lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. So I wanted to focus on this first part because the very first sentence of this first verse, I'm going to tie it back to when we started the Genesis study. This is the book of the generations of Adam. This is another toldot. So if you remember, we went through that. It's a literary term that is connecting the current account or narrative we're talking about to the previous one, and then it pushes the narrative forward. It gives it progression. So this is the book of the generations of Adam, and it even gives you a better clarifying when God created man. So it's tying it back to like chapter 2 and chapter 3 and chapter 4. This is the book of the generations of Adam. Remember Adam, and when he was created, this is what is going to come directly from Adam, and this is his genealogy. And so this is the second of the toldots. And toldot simply is the Hebrew word that means of the generations or book of the generations. This one specifically says book, actually. And in Hebrew, it's scroll, which is interesting. So it's possible that Moses actually had a document with this genealogy on it that had been passed down. And so he put it into his account of Genesis. But so I just wanted to show you that part. Remember that there are 11 that structure Genesis as a whole, the whole book, and it ties it all together into one unique unit, which I think is really, really interesting. But this is what comes from Adam. This is his genealogy. So, and it specifically gives you a summarizing statement. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. These next couple of verses, or this verse, the rest of it, is summarizing what just happened. So God creates mankind, he makes them in their likeness, he makes them male and female, and he blesses them, and he even names them. And I think the purpose of this is, not just to repeat or summarize, but to connect the entire story together and state that all of the children of Adam, every single one of them, is made in the image or likeness of God. So he says here, he made him in the likeness of God. And then what happens when he has his own son, Seth? He fathers a son in his own likeness, after his image. So what's Adam's image? God. So this is showing that everyone who has come from Adam shares this same image and likeness of God himself. So I want to point that out, that every single person that has come from Adam is going to share this and has this innate value, and purpose. And I think that's beautiful. Um, but there's something else that pops up that we start to think about is, holy cow, did he live a long time? When he was 130, he had Seth. So he's already had Cain and Abel, remember, but he's having children still at 130. And Eve is almost exactly the same age as Adam. That's crazy. Most people today, actually, I don't think anyone on record we have, like within recent times, has lived to 130. That's insane. So how is he having children, and then after that, living another 800 years to a total of 930? And if you just continue down this genealogy, and the structure repeats itself. Excuse me, I'm going too far. The structure repeats itself. You have the patriarch, so Adam. He lived this many years, and he has a son. And after he has that son, he lives so many more years. It gives the total, and he dies. That is a repeated structure. It says the same thing for Seth, and then for Seth's son Enosh, and so forth. It goes all the way down to Noah, which chapter 6 will be about him. But it goes all the way down through there, and it's that same repeating structure. So one more detail is right here at the very end of verse 5, and he died. That is at the end of every single one of these patriarchs, or these leaders that are leading to Noah. It's after every single one of them except one. And we'll talk about him in a second. But all of them died. So the curse that was placed upon Adam because of his sin, that he would surely die, is true. I'm sure everyone was waiting to see if it would happen. Adam finally dies. And yes, this does happen. So what we see is, not only do people live an extremely long time, but they do still deteriorate, grow old, and die. The question remains, though, how is this possible? Is this literal? Does this mean that people actually lived this long at this time period? If they did, why did it change? If this isn't meant to be literal, what do we get from this? And so I've done some research on this. There is the straightforward reading that he lived 930 years before he died. There are a few other scholars that they don't think so. So, for example, there is an article on BioLogos's website. It's called Long Lifespans in Genesis, Literal or Symbolic. And the author is Jim Stump, and he's written other articles for BioLogos. And he suggests that these numbers are not meant to be taken as historical dates, like this is how long this person lived or died or had children, but rather they're more symbolic. He states, though, that not that God couldn't do this, because he believes God could help people live this long, but we don't see it happen today. So it's more likely that this is not what this text is trying to get across. And he suggests that we look at the context of how the original reader would have taken it, and that's how we should think about it. Now, I would agree with Jim. I would agree that we should definitely heavily focus on the context so we can better understand how we should read this, because how the original readers, how the author wrote this and meant it to be read, is how we should take it as well to get the meaning from it. I don't think he actually does this in his article. So instead of taking them straightforwardly, he makes a case that there are some special culturally significant numbers to the ancient Near East. So that would be like Canaan, Israel, Mesopotamia, all of those nations in this area, specifically the Mesopotamian area, that they had some culturally significant numbers. I don't disagree with this. I think that's very obvious. He specifically focuses on numbers like 7. Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, in the creation account, God creates in 6 days and rests on the 7th. The Israelites work in 6 days and rest on the 7th because that's what God does. 7 is a repeated number in the Bible. And it's even in some Ugaritic writings. The city of Ugarit was a Canaanite city, or at least a city in Canaan before Israel took it. And they have some similar writings that have the number 7 in it. It's a prominent number that's used. So I don't disagree with this, but he chooses the number 60 to try and make this work. So the Babylonians had a base 60 counting number or counting system called sexagesimal, I believe, um, or base 60 number system. And so it's like our number system now that we use tens, 10, 20, 30 goes up to 100, and we can divide it by 10, and it's very efficient. They used 60, and they would use multiples of 60 for their number system. And so he tries to state that because the Babylonians and maybe some others in the same area used 60 and it was significant to them, that so did the Bible, and so did the authors of the Bible. I don't think so. Just because they did it doesn't mean that the Israelites would have done it. There are many different things culturally, religiously, that the Israelites had nothing to do with their neighbors. And this is a common thing for scholars to say, well, because their neighbors did it, they probably did it too. That's true for some things, just because it's pretty widespread, basic things. But for the most part, I think Israel was pretty unique in a lot of the things they did. So I don't think it's a one-for-one. Because they did it, Israel must have done it too. I don't agree with that. I think you need to prove it before you can say that it must have happened. But anyway, this is his case. And so what he does is he'll look at a number. So let's go to, let's see, his examples. Methuselah. So Methuselah on this list, he lived the longest, living 969 years. It's crazy, almost 1,000 years. That's a lot. He specifically says, as an example, when Methuselah was 187, he had his son Lamech. And what he does is he takes 180 and 7, he kind of splits them apart into two different numbers. And he says that 180 has 60 goes into it 3 times. It's a multiple of 60. And then he has, it just takes the 7. So you have 180, which is got 3 60s in it. So remember, 60 is that culturally significant number. And then 7 is left over. That's another specific symbolic number. And so that's what he tries to do. He tries to see, so look, all the numbers are able to be broken down like this. So for some, these are symbolic numbers, not literal historical documents, basically. The problem is that not all the numbers fit so neatly. So if you go back to Adam, remember he was 130 years old when he has Seth. He says you can still divide by that. So you take, instead of just 130, you take 120, which 60 goes into twice, and you got 10 left over. So obviously 30 doesn't go into 10. So what he does is he says 5 years is equal to 60 months. And so he takes the leftover 10, splits it into 2 5s, and says it's 60 plus 60 plus 60 months and 60 months. So you can still use the system. It gets even further complicated with some other numbers that don't fit this system evenly into 5s or 30s like that. And it gets really weird. And he even admits, a counterpoint that can't you just force most of these numbers into this system if you make the calculations complicated enough? And he says, yes, you could. But he doesn't think that's the case. He doesn't offer a whole lot of explanation as to why that's the case. But even, let's say you can. Let's say you can fit all these numbers into this weird system of 60s and 7s. Why? Why did they do this? And he says he doesn't know. There's nothing to persuade me that this is a system that they did. And he's like, I don't know. There's no, he says they're symbolic numbers, but we're not quite sure why he calls them ancients, why the ancients would have written it this way, but they did. And I don't find that persuasive at all. Like, you just break apart all these numbers in really odd ways with a number that's not very culturally significant to the Bible. Like, why not 40s or 12s? I mean, there's 12 tribes of Israel. 12 is used often, like 12 stones. 40, there's 40 years in the wilderness. 40 days, 40 nights. 40 is a super culturally significant number to the Bible. Why are they not all divisible by 7? Or why are they not all whole numbers? There's so many other better ways that if these were symbolic, they would have fit just based on the Bible's context, than trying to shove them all into a sexagesimal system that the Israelites didn't use. I don't find it very persuasive. And there's no reason or method to why they did it. And not all of these numbers work. So I'm going to reject that. I just don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. And I think his motivations, he states that there's a lack of evidence that these were historical numbers, so we're going to go with this weird sexagesimal 60 base a base 60 system. That's what we're gonna think this is. Instead of just taking the straightforward reading, which is Adam lived 130 years and had a son. Like that, to me, the way the Hebrew is written, it's written in a historical context. The book is trying to connect it to the previous accounts, and they're trying to push it forward into the next account. All of this is written in a historical manner. Just read it the way it was written, instead of trying to jump through hoops with some odd mathematics. So I don't like that explanation. I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. If he was able to provide a reason why they did this and showed more examples of it in the Bible and stuff like that, but he doesn't. So I don't quite understand that part. Other people try to fit it into multiples of 40, but not all these numbers are divisible by 40, so that one doesn't work either. Another one states that instead of years, these are meant to be months. So instead of Adam living 930 years, he lives 930 months. This starts to get weird, though, because if you do the same thing for when they had a child, these people didn't live they didn't live long enough. So Seth, if you divide his years when he had a child by 12, you get around 8 years old when he has his first child, or at least the child that it's recorded in the text. And when you get to Kenan, and even Mahalalel, those are two more down in the genealogy, they would have been 5 years old when they had a kid. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It might work for when they die, but having kids, no, they're not having children at 5 years old. That one seems, again, too ridiculous to accept. I'm not saying that from like a bias, but just like you would rather believe they were 5 years old when they had children than just read it the way it says it was. I don't think you should be reading it that way. More likely, it is a straightforward reading based on how the Hebrew is written, but also because this genealogy is used in Chronicles and it's used in the Gospels, and they use them to tie kings to these genealogies and say this is where they came from. They also use this genealogy for the Gospels to show where Jesus comes from and how he's tied back to the creation of man. If they read them as just straightforward genealogies, that shows you the context. And doing odd mathematics doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So, this is meant to be a historical document showing us how old these individuals lived when they had children and when they died, all the way to Noah. And it is following that seed line we talked about. In Genesis 3, God states that from your seed, Eve, will be a man who will crush the head of the serpent, destroy his works, and restore everything. This is following that line. Seth is that child because Abel is dead and Cain obviously is not that righteous person. And it's going to follow all the way down to Noah. But, okay, so if the text is stating that they did live this long, how is that possible? How is that possible? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So, we're going to get into some genetics here. We needed to understand a few basic things about it. If you already know this, I apologize, but not everyone knows these kinds of things. Within our cells, we have all of the instructions for our bodies within our DNA. That's within the nucleus of each cell. And that's made up of 46 different chromosomes. And that's where the DNA is all wrapped up together into these chromosomes. At the end of each chromosome, so on the tail end of them, you have something called a telomere. Telomeres are repeating structures of DNA, and their whole purpose is to basically safeguard the DNA, prevent it from being damaged and corrupted when things are replicated. And it's actually tied to how we age. As our cells divide and multiply as we get older, those telomeres shorten. They are damaged and they're shortened. And eventually, they will be removed or damaged to the point where our cells can no longer divide and replicate. And we die. We die of old age. Some people will die earlier than others. It's been shown that people who have longer telomeres or their body is able to kind of protect them better, they live longer. And so I want to focus on these kinds of things. It's possible that when Adam and Eve, when they were created, remember they were perfect, without imperfection, without corruption, without damage. They were perfect. After they sinned, God says you will surely die. and they started to deteriorate, and we saw that Adam did die, but it took a really, really long time. Well, if they were perfect, just this side of perfection, right? They just now began to corrupt. If God made them so perfect that he has all these mechanisms for repair and to keep them whole, it would take a long time for those things to wear out, possibly 930 years or so. But why does this change? Why did that change down to us? Because all the way down to Noah, people lived 900 years old. Why would this change? So to focus on this, we're going to go to a different passage to show you something. Chapter 5, verse 32. After Noah was 500 years old, he fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, it's unlikely that these are triplets. It doesn't use the word triplet here, and it talks about their ages in a later genealogy. It just means that when he was 500, he now has 3 children. Regardless, notice this number, 500 years. And remember previously, every other person, 187. Enoch was only 65 when he has Methuselah. Who else? Mahalalel was only 65. Remember, Adam was 130 when he had. He's only 130 when he has Seth. So Noah has his children at a much later age, almost 5 times the age of most of these people, 4 to 5 times. So why is this significant? Well, if a man or a woman nowadays has a child when they are much older, like a man 70 or 80 or a woman who's nearing menopause, it is more likely that their children will have mutations or birth defects. And it's because those reproductive cells are also older. They've been replicating longer, and they will have those signs of age. So if this is true also for Noah, he has children at 500 years old, it's very possible that his children would have some mutations. And if they had them where those telomeres are in your chromosomes, or maybe there was a mutation in the proteins that kind of upkeep those telomeres, their ages may be jeopardized. And that's actually what we see later on. We're not going to read through it here, but Shem actually dies at the age of 600. That is much, much earlier than most people. I'm actually going to go to that and show it to you. All right, so I've switched over to Genesis chapter 11. I'm still going to go through the flood at a later date, but this is just to show you the whole aging question. So these are the generations of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he has Arpachshad, which is 2 years after the flood. And when Shem had lived after he fathered his son 500 years. So he dies after this. So that's total 100 plus 500 is 600 years. His son has a child at 35, and he only lives another 403 years. So that's 438 is his total age. So that's almost 200 years younger than his father. Actually, his father would have outlived him. Grandson was 30 years when he had his son, and he only lived to be 433 years old. Again, his grandfather is going to outlive him. And so you see it, these few are about the same. You have 430, 460, and then it drops to 229, 239, or excuse me, 39, 239, 230, and then it drops even further to less than 200, less than 150. What's happening here? So what's really interesting about the decrease in these ages from 900 plus years old all the way down to under 200, even close to 100 years, and even nowadays, 70 to 100 years. What's cool about this decrease is that you can actually plot this mathematically on a graph and follow this. There's an article by Creation Ministries International by a individual known as Dr. Robert Carter. And he does this. He plots the decrease in ages of each of these patriarchs, each of these individuals, and his goal is to see if this actually makes sense. And it does. So I want to show you um, I want to show you this graph. Okay, so this is not my graph. I did not do the math. This is done by Dr. Robert Carter of CMI. So he plots the lifespan of each individual by the generation. So which individual of the generation it is. And what he finds is that each person lives on average about 88% less than the previous one. And you can see the drop here. It drops every time, and there's a whole bunch here, and then it just continues to drop. This fits on an exponential decay curve. That shows that this is happening mathematically. This isn't like one of the biblical authors or Moses. This isn't like Moses was thinking back, doing reverse mathematics and thinking, I need Adam to live a super long time. I need to take our ages and make these mathematically make sense and do the math for every single one of them. Give them that age and project it back into the hypothetical past. The fact that this fits so well, and they didn't have the tools to be doing this curve of exponential decay on a graph, shows you that this is what happened. This is actually what happened. And again, this graph is on this article, and I'll put the title below. It's called "The Rapid Decline in Biblical Lifespans." It's on Creation Ministries International. I will put that title below in the description of the video, and you guys can go read it for yourself. I highly suggest you do. But so we've talked about having children at older ages causing problems for your kids and possible mutations. But there's another issue that could add to this as well. Something else that can cause a decrease is what's called a bottleneck. So at the flood, there's only 3 breeding pairs of people. You have Noah and his wife, but they're never cited to have any more children. Remember, he was already 500 years old when he had his last kid. So you have Shem, Ham, and Japheth and their wives. And so it's just those 3 having children. So you went from thousands of people at this time down to 8. And only 6 of them are having kids. So just 3 couples. When that happens, and you have that reduction in a genetic pool, you have the chance to have more mutations build up. The larger population you have, you can have so if one person has the mutation and another person doesn't, you can have children who don't ever show that, or you may even get rid of that mutation. But if everyone has the same mutations, it's just going to compound. And if these mutations are in the reproductive cells, or when we were talking about the telomeres, this is only going to further decrease the genetic fitness of these people, which just means they're probably not going to live as long. And that's exactly what we see right around Shem. So Shem himself lives only 600 years, which is much less than the previous generations. Then his kids go down to 400, 200, 150. It's dropping. Specifically, right around 88% of the previous generation. See, with these two things, with the having children at an older age, and then having that bottleneck and the buildup of mutations, is going to cause this genetic decay to the point where now we live only, on average, 70 to 80 years old? 100 being like, wow, that's a lot. This fits. This shows again that this is a historical account, that someone is faithfully writing these down, and it fits mathematically. And that just blows my mind. So, could we have lived 900 plus years old? Yes. Adam, Eve, they were perfect when they were made. No corruption, no decay, no mutations. However, when they sinned and were exiled from the Garden of Eden and they started to die, there were mutations building up over time. And eventually, lifespans began to decrease. And here we are today. It fits. And it blows my mind. So hopefully this kind of added some more interest to a genealogy that I think otherwise, if you just read straight through, would be kind of bland. We didn't mention a whole lot, but we have Enoch. Enoch only lives about 365 years before God takes him. And He just disappears. It just says he was not. He never died. And he's considered to be very righteous. So he's the only one who did not die out of all of these people. But death is a certainty for everyone. The good thing is that we have a Savior. We have that seed, the one who crushed the serpent's head, as Jesus. He defeated Satan and his works. And he gave us new life. And eventually we will be given new bodies. We'll be given a new life in the new heaven and the new earth where all is made new and restored. And there will be no death. We will live longer than Adam did. And that's beautiful. So, hopefully this has answered some questions about science, about the Old Testament. Did we live this long or did we not? And hopefully it's bridged a gap for you. If you like this, again, like it, leave a comment, hit subscribe, hit that bell so you know when more of this content is coming up. If you have a question, leave it below in the comments or send me an email. I would love to answer it, and I would love to do more of this. So let me know what you think. Until next time, friends.